Welcome! I am Public Enemy Numero Uno, and thank you so much for watching this. Today I want to talk about playing a Warlock a different way. I am not here to critique the design or even suggest that what this video talks about is the better way to play a Warlock, merely just a different way that others may choose to use if they wish. The Warlock class is an unusual one. It's a spellcaster that's not a spellcaster, with a variety of open-ended choices and decisions that no other class really has to define their character. Normal spellcasters aren't too far off with the selection of spells that they are granted, but a Warlock is a bit different because as the player has the option of either spells, abilities, or straight-up buffs. This freedom of selection is both interesting and can make most any Warlock feel different and apart from any other Warlocks, while most other classes, almost regardless of subclass, are generally played the exact same way or very similar. This freedom of choice is both interesting and incredible to play. My question is, does it make sense? I ask this question because the class that is often best compared to the Warlock narratively is the Cleric. While the Warlock is arcane magic and the Cleric is divine magic, both rely on an outside source to grant them their power in one way or another. Yet each Cleric subclass is pretty constrained to play out their particular domain, lacking in a freedom of choice that the Warlock has. Yet despite being narratively constrained to a source, typically a grayer creature or entity of some description, a Warlock has a lot of freedom, and I don't know why. How would a Warlock of an Archfang gain abilities like Devil's Sight, an actual ability that is unique to devils, and no Fae has? Not even demons have it. Yet it is a choice of the Warlock on whether or not they gain access to that. So, back to my original question. Does that make sense? On the surface, no. To break this question down for myself logically, I split it into three things to explore separately. I tried to define the Warlock class by its name, its narrative, and its mechanics to see if I could make logical sense of this. The word Warlock is Old Anglo-Saxon from the word verloga, which means traitor or deceiver, so one that decides and acts outside the norm, potentially to their own interests. The modern definition of the word is a man who practices witchcraft. That is derived from calling someone a traitor after accusing them of witchcraft in the good old days of witch burning. Furthermore, the first time that I can recall coming across the word Warlock is in the story The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks, published in 1977. Side note, I pronounce it as Shannara, although most anyone else seems to pronounce it as Shannara. In that story, the big bad is ancient evil sorcerer simply called the Warlock Lord, a human who had sought out the forbidden and secretive practices of magic for the betterment of his own interest. So, an individual of his own volition seeking out magic for their own personal gain. Neither of these suggest being tied to a patron unless you count witchcraft as selling your soul to the devil for magical powers, which some do. But it is not definitive in any way, and both seem to point to personal action. The narrative of the Warlock class can be found all through the introduction to the class in the player's handbook on pages 105 to 106. It has statements like, a Warlock is defined by a pact with an otherworldly being. Sometimes a relationship between Warlock and patron is like that of a cleric and a deity, though the beings that serve as patrons for Warlocks are not gods. Or, stories of Warlocks binding themselves to fiends are widely known, but many Warlocks serve patrons that are not fiendish. Sometimes a traveler in the wilds comes to a strangely beautiful tower, meets its fey lord or lady, and stumbles into a pact without being fully aware of it. However, the clearest indication is the first ability granted to the Warlock class on page 107, Otherworldly Patron. At first level, you have struck a bargain with an otherworldly being of your choice, the Archfey, the Fiend, or the Great Old One. It seems quite clear that the Warlock is tied to a patron, but is it? Because the same pages also offer these nuggets of text. Warlocks are driven by an insatiable need for knowledge and power, which compels them into their pacts and shapes their lives. This thirst drives Warlocks into their pacts and shapes their latter careers as well. And once a pact is made, a Warlock thirst for knowledge and power can't be slacked with mere study and research. Rather, the vast majority of Warlocks spend their days in active pursuits of their goals, which typically means some kind of adventuring. If not for the words pact in these sentences, the general tone is one seeking out forbidden knowledge for personal reasons. The pact themselves are described as a nuisance, a speed bump on their path to personal power and knowledge. While the narrative is well constrained to tie a Warlock to a patron, it does offer some insight into a Warlock that might not want anything to do with said patron, potentially doing away with the patron altogether if the options were permitted. Curious. The last part that I considered was the mechanics of the class. The Warlock establishes a focus, their subclass. That focus grants them features and abilities as they continue on that route. Eventually, they are permitted to choose their own path with spells and abilities that they are unique, diverse, and seemingly completely untied from its source. If a patron was so all-important to the Warlock for the class to function, why the freedom? How could they achieve such abilities and powers? If the narrative was of a Warlock that focused on a particular style of magic that was beyond the mere book bindings of wizards, then I think it would be more understandable for this freedom, discovering little nuggets of new abilities and powers throughout their travels, expanding their growing power with what they chose and desire for themselves. A curious thought. So there you have it, a class whose name and mechanics do not suggest one bound by a patron, but one seeking out forbidden knowledge all on their own. The narrative of the class still ties them to a patron, but it is a weak chain, when that could be done away with if the player so chooses. Now this is just me taking a different view on the Warlock, and I do not even suggest others follow this thought. Especially considering some of my earlier videos, it is evident that I am all for connecting characters to the world with things like relationships, and the Warlock patron does that perfectly. All I offer is possibly a different way to look at the class in a logical fashion. On a separate note, why is Charisma the Warlock's pat magic ability? Most everything written in the book that I showed you is a constant pursuit for knowledge, with the mantra, knowledge is power. Why isn't it intelligence? If the suggestion is that it implies a Warlock's relation to their patron, then why isn't the Cleric's spellcasting ability Charisma too? And why is the Sorcerer's Charisma? I feel that Constitution would make more sense, as it is power drawn from within. Both a Bard and Paladin using Charisma makes good sense to them, as one uses songs and poetry, while the other is powered by their commitment to their order and vows. But why a Warlock? Anyways, that should be all for today. With that, please comment down below as I would love to hear more ideas or criticisms. Thank you again for watching my video and have an enjoyable day.